The sharp ring of Caleb Reed's phone shattered the pre-dawn silence, jolting him awake from what had been his first decent sleep in weeks. His heart hammered against his ribs as he fumbled for the device on his nightstand, squinting at the bright screen. "Mr. Reed, this is Sunshine Daycare. I'm afraid there's been a pipe burst in our facility overnight. We're completely flooded and will be closed for at least a week while repairs are made." The center director's voice was apologetic but firm. "I'm so sorry for the inconvenience." Caleb sat bolt upright, sleep forgotten. "Wait, you're closed today, but I have the most important meeting of my career in 4 hours." As CEO of Reed Pharmaceuticals, Caleb had spent months negotiating a potential partnership with Europe's largest medical supply chain. The final meeting, the one that would either secure or destroy the deal, was scheduled for 9 a.m. His presentation was ready, his team prepared, but now his carefully constructed plans were crumbling. "Sophie," he whispered, glancing at the time, 5:17 a.m. His 5-year-old daughter was still sleeping peacefully down the hall, blissfully unaware that her father was about to face the most challenging day since her mother died 2 years ago. Since Sarah's passing, Caleb had rebuilt their lives with meticulous precision. Sophie at Sunshine Daycare, while he grew the company from a struggling family business into a thriving pharmaceutical enterprise. But all it took was one burst pipe to throw everything into chaos. Caleb paced his bedroom, scrolling through his contacts. His parents lived 3 states away. His assistant wouldn't arrive until 8. None of Sophie's friends' parents would be awake yet, and he couldn't bear the thought of waking someone at this hour to beg for help. He was running out of options when a memory flickered in his mind: the woman from 4B. The kindergarten teacher. He'd only spoken to her a handful of times since she moved in 6 months ago. Brief nods in the elevator, a quick hello as they collected their mail. Once she'd helped Sophie pick up the colored pencils she'd dropped in the hallway. Madeline Ellis, that was her name. She'd mentioned being a kindergarten teacher at Sophie's school during one of their brief conversations. It was a long shot, but Caleb was desperate. At precisely 6:05 a.m., after dressing hastily and rehearsing what to say, Caleb stood outside apartment 4B, his hand hesitating before knocking. The door opened after the third gentle rap, revealing a woman with tousled honey-brown hair and sleepy green eyes. "Mr. Reed." Madeline Ellis blinked in surprise, quickly tightening the belt of her robe. "Is everything okay?" Caleb swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how bizarre this must seem. "I am so sorry to bother you this early, Miss Ellis. There's been an emergency with Sophie's daycare. They're flooded and closed for the week. I have an absolutely critical meeting today that I cannot miss, and I—" He paused, hearing the desperation in his own voice. "I remember you mentioning you're a kindergarten teacher, and I wondered if by some miracle you might be able to help. I know it's completely inappropriate to ask, and I understand if— Is Sophie okay?" Madeline's concern seemed genuine, her sleep-foggy eyes clearing with worry. "She's fine, still sleeping, actually. The daycare called about the flooding, and I'm just—" He ran his hand through his dark hair. "I'm out of options." Madeline studied him for a moment, then her expression softened. "Today's a professional development day at school, no students." A small smile touched her lips. "What time is your meeting?" Relief flooded through Caleb so intensely that his knees nearly buckled. 9 o'clock. It should be over by noon, but things might run late. I can pay you, of course, whatever rate you think is fair." Madeline shook her head. "That's not necessary. Sophie's a sweet girl. I'd be happy to help." She glanced at her watch. "Give me 15 minutes to get ready and I'll come over." "Thank you," Caleb breathed, the words inadequate for the gratitude he felt. "Apartment 4D, the door will be unlocked." Exactly 15 minutes later, Madeline arrived at his door dressed in jeans and a simple blue blouse, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Caleb was in the kitchen, attempting to make breakfast while simultaneously reviewing notes for his presentation on his tablet. "Good morning again," Madeline said quietly, stepping into the apartment. Caleb looked up, struck by how different she looked, fully awake and dressed. He'd always thought his neighbor was pretty in a soft, understated way, but seeing her now in his kitchen, morning light streaming through the windows, he realized she was beautiful. Thank you again for coming, he said, setting down his tablet. Sophie's still asleep. She usually wakes up around 7. Her routine is written on the whiteboard on the refrigerator. I've made coffee if you'd like some. Madeline smiled, accepting the offered mug. I can see you're busy preparing. Don't let me interrupt. Just show me where everything is and we'll be fine. For the next 20 minutes, Caleb gave Madeline a whirlwind tour of the apartment, showing her Sophie's favorite toys, emergency contacts, and the snacks his daughter preferred. Throughout it all, Madeline remained calm and attentive, asking thoughtful questions that somehow put Caleb at ease. "Daddy," a small voice called from the hallway. Sophie appeared, rubbing her eyes, her dark curls a wild tangle around her face. She spotted Madeline and stopped, her eyes widening. "Good morning, sweetheart," Caleb said, kneeling to her level. "Remember Miss Ellis from down the hall? She's going to stay with you today because Sunshine Daycare had a little accident with some water." Sophie regarded Madeline cautiously. "You live in 4B, you helped me with my pencils." Madeline knelt down beside Caleb, her smile warm. "That's right, Sophie. And I'm a teacher at your school, though not in your class. I thought maybe today we could have some fun together while your dad goes to his important meeting. Would that be okay?" Sophie considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Do you know how to make pancakes? Daddy always burns them." Caleb laughed, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "She's not wrong. Pancakes happen to be my specialty," Madeline replied with a conspiratorial wink at Sophie. "With blueberries, even." By 7:30, Sophie was happily devouring blueberry pancakes that were decidedly not burnt, chattering away to Madeline about her collection of stuffed animals. Caleb watched them from the kitchen island as he gathered his materials, struck by how naturally Madeline interacted with his daughter and how long it had been since their apartment had felt this warm. "I should go," he said reluctantly, checking his watch. "I want to get to the office early to prepare." Sophie hopped down from her chair and ran to hug his legs. "Good luck, Daddy. Make all the money," Caleb chuckled, bending to kiss the top of her head. "That's not exactly what Daddy does, but thank you, Princess." Madeline walked him to the door, Sophie already back at the table with her pancakes. "Don't worry about anything here," she assured him. "We'll be just fine." Caleb paused at the door, struck by an unfamiliar feeling reluctance to leave. "My cell number is on the fridge. Call if you need anything at all." "We won't," Madeline said with quiet confidence. "But I appreciate knowing I can." She smiled, a gentle, reassuring expression that somehow steadied him. "Go be brilliant, Mr. Reed." "Caleb," he corrected. "Please call me Caleb." "Caleb," she repeated, and something about the way she said his name made his heart beat a little faster. "Good luck today." The door closed behind him, and Caleb stood in the hallway for a moment, briefcase in hand, wondering how a morning that had started with such disaster had somehow led to feeling more at peace than he had in months. Throughout his critical meeting, Caleb's phone remained mercifully silent. No emergencies, no desperate texts, just a single message at 10:30 with a photo of Sophie and Madeline at the kitchen table surrounded by watercolors, both grinning widely with the caption, "Art class in session. All is well." That tiny reassurance helped him deliver the most confident presentation of his career. By noon, the European partnership was secured, congratulatory handshakes were exchanged, and Caleb found himself hurrying home with an unexpected lightness in his step. When he opened his apartment door, he was greeted by the sound of laughter. Following it to the living room, he discovered a blanket fort constructed between the couch and coffee table. Inside, Sophie and Madeline were reading a book together, his daughter curled comfortably against Madeline's side. "Daddy," Sophie scrambled out of the fort when she spotted him. "Miss Maddie made a castle with me, and we painted and we made cookies, and she knows all the words to Frozen." "Miss Maddie, huh?" Caleb smiled, lifting Sophie into his arms. "Sounds like you had a much better day than I did." Madeline emerged from the fort with considerably more grace, smoothing her hair. "How did the meeting go?" "We got the partnership," Caleb said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "It's going to change everything for the company." "That's wonderful." Madeline's smile was genuine, her eyes bright with shared happiness for his success. "Daddy, can Miss Maddie stay for lunch, please?" Sophie tugged at his tie. "She makes the best grilled cheese, not burnt at all." Well, with that glowing recommendation, how could I refuse? Caleb looked at Madeline. "Would you stay? It's the least I can do after you saved the day." Madeline hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." Over lunch, grilled cheese sandwiches that were indeed perfect. Sophie regaled Caleb with stories of their morning adventures. Madeline occasionally chimed in, but mostly she watched the interaction between father and daughter with a soft smile that made Caleb's chest tighten in a not unpleasant way. "So," Caleb said after Sophie had run off to play in her room, "it seems I owe you far more than lunch." "You didn't just watch Sophie, you gave her a wonderful day." Madeline shook her head, gathering plates from the table. "It was my pleasure, honestly. Sophie is a remarkable child. You've done an amazing job with her." "Mostly I've been trying not to mess her up," Caleb admitted, helping clear the dishes. "After her mother died, I was so focused on keeping the business afloat and making sure Sophie had stability that I sometimes worry I've missed the joy part." Madeline placed a gentle hand on his arm. "The fact that you worry about that proves you're a good father. And Sophie is clearly happy and thriving. Give yourself some credit." Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. Something passed between them, understanding, connection that Caleb hadn't felt in a very long time. The moment was broken by Sophie barreling back into the kitchen. "Can Miss Maddie watch me again tomorrow, please?" Reality crashed back. "Sunshine Daycare is closed all week," Caleb realized aloud, "and I have follow-up meetings scheduled." "I can help," Madeline offered, then quickly added, "if you'd like. I have the whole week off for professional development, but most of it is independent work I can do anywhere." Caleb stared at her, once again overwhelmed by her kindness. "Are you sure? That's asking so much." "I'm offering," she replied simply. "Sophie and I get along wonderfully, and it sounds like you have important work to do." That night, after Madeline had gone home and Sophie was tucked into bed, Caleb sat at his kitchen island with a glass of whiskey, trying to process the day. On the refrigerator, Sophie had insisted on hanging the watercolor painting she'd made with Madeline, a colorful depiction of 3 figures holding hands beneath a rainbow. When Caleb had asked who they were, Sophie had replied matter-of-factly, "That's you, me, and Miss Maddie, silly." Caleb studied the painting, a strange ache in his chest. It had been so long since he'd allowed anyone into their little world, so long since he'd even considered the possibility. After Sarah died, he'd thrown himself into being both parents to Sophie and saving the family business her parents had built. There hadn't been room for anything or anyone else. But today, watching Madeline with Sophie, seeing how naturally she fit into their home, he felt something he hadn't expected, possibility. The week unfolded in a new routine. Madeline arrived each morning at 7:30, sometimes bringing bagels or muffins. Sophie was always delighted to see her, rushing to the door with new ideas for their day's adventures. Caleb would leave for work with a strange reluctance, looking forward to returning home more than he ever had before. Each evening, he came back to find his apartment transformed one day into an archaeological dig site with artifacts hidden throughout the living room, another day into a bakery with cookies cooling on racks. Sophie blossomed under Madeline's creative attention, telling Caleb each night at bedtime that Miss Maddie was the best grown-up friend ever. By Thursday, Caleb found himself lingering in the mornings, making excuses to delay his departure. After Sophie ran off to brush her teeth, he found himself alone with Madeline in the kitchen. "I can't thank you enough for this week," he said, leaning against the counter. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Madeline smiled, the now familiar warmth in her green eyes making his pulse quicken. "It's been wonderful for me too. Sophie is such a joy." She hesitated, then added, "I'll miss her when daycare reopens next week." "Maybe," Caleb began, then paused, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Maybe we could have dinner sometime. The 3 of us, I mean. Sophie would love it, and he stopped, realizing he was fumbling like a teenager. "I'd like that," Madeline said softly. Friday evening, after his final partnership follow-up meeting, Caleb returned home early with a bouquet of daisies. He found Sophie and Madeline in the kitchen making homemade pizza, both of them with flour on their cheeks. "Flowers?" Sophie asked when she spotted them. "Is somebody sick?" Caleb laughed. "No, sweetheart. These are for Miss Maddie to say thank you for taking such good care of you this week." "Oh," Sophie nodded sagely, "because you like her," the directness of children. Caleb felt heat rise to his face as he handed the flowers to Madeline, whose cheeks had turned a delicate pink. "I do like her," he admitted. "She's been very kind to us." "I like her too," Sophie declared. "Can she be our friend forever?" Madeline accepted the flowers, her fingers briefly touching Caleb's. "I'd like to be your friend for a very long time," she told Sophie, but her eyes met Caleb's, and there was a question in them that made his heart race. That night, after Sophie was asleep and they'd shared the slightly misshapen but delicious pizza, Caleb walked Madeline to his door. "I got you something too," Madeline said, reaching into her bag. "It's silly, but—" She handed him a small, wrapped package. Inside was a cookbook titled Perfectly Unburnt, Breakfast Basics for Beginners. Caleb burst out laughing. "Sophie mentioned the pancake situation at least 5 times, Madeline explained, her eyes twinkling. "This is perfect," Caleb said, still chuckling. Then more seriously, "Would you maybe want to help me test some of these recipes? Sunday morning, perhaps?" Madeline's smile softened. "I'd love that." Standing in his doorway, Caleb was struck by how much he didn't want her to leave, how right it felt to have her here in his space in his life. "Madeline," he said quietly, "I don't know how to thank you for this week. It wasn't just childcare. You brought something back into our home that's been missing for a long time." Madeline's expression turned gentle. "Joy," she suggested. "Yes," he agreed, "joy." Then, before he could overthink it, he leaned forward and kissed her cheek. "Thank you." The touch of his lips to her skin was brief, but when he pulled back, something had changed in her eyes, a softening, an openness that took his breath away. "Sunday," she whispered. "I'll bring the blueberries." Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Caleb woke early, his stomach fluttering with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. He and Sophie tidied the apartment together, his daughter chattering excitedly about Miss Maddie coming for breakfast. "Is Miss Maddie your girlfriend now, Daddy?" Sophie asked as they arranged flowers on the table, daisies, like the ones he'd given Madeline. Caleb nearly dropped the vase. "No, sweetheart, she's our friend, a very nice friend who helped us out this week." Sophie considered this, her small brow furrowed. "But you look at her like Prince Eric looks at Ariel, all googly." "Googly," Caleb repeated, trying not to laugh. "I don't think that's a word." "It is," Sophie insisted. "And you do, and that's okay, Daddy. I think Miss Maddie is pretty too." Before Caleb could respond to that startling insight, the doorbell rang. Madeline stood in the hallway holding a basket of blueberries and wearing a simple sundress that made Caleb momentarily forget how to speak. Sophie had no such problem, launching herself at Madeline's legs with an enthusiastic hug. "We got flowers again," Sophie announced, dragging Madeline inside. "And Daddy cleaned the whole house, even under the couch where we don't look." Madeline caught Caleb's eye over Sophie's head, her smile both amused and touched. "That sounds very thorough." The morning unfolded with a warmth that had nothing to do with the sunshine streaming through the windows. Together, they made pancakes from Caleb's new cookbook, some perfectly round, others resembling clouds or, in Sophie's case, what she claimed was a dinosaur but looked more like a blob with a tail. They ate at the table with the daisies, Sophie dominating the conversation with elaborate plans for future cooking projects they simply must try together. After breakfast, Caleb suggested a walk to the park. The three of them strolled through the neighborhood, Sophie between them, occasionally reaching for both their hands to swing herself forward. To anyone watching, Caleb realized they would look like a family. The thought should have unsettled him, but instead it felt strangely right. At the park, Sophie ran ahead to the playground, leaving Caleb and Madeline on a bench watching her climb the jungle gym. "Thank you for today," Madeline said, her eyes on Sophie. "This has been lovely." Caleb turned to look at her profile, struck again by how beautiful she was in the dappled sunlight. "I should be thanking you for everything this week, for today." He hesitated, then added quietly, "for making us feel like a family again." Madeline's gaze shifted to meet his, surprise and something deeper in her expression. "Sophie is an amazing child, and you're an exceptional father." "I'm trying," he admitted. "It hasn't been easy since Sarah died. The company was struggling, and I had this tiny person depending on me for everything. Some days I felt like I was drowning." He hadn't meant to say so much, but there was something about Madeline that made it easy to open up. "And now?" she asked gently. Caleb looked at Sophie, then back at Madeline. "Now I feel like I'm finally coming up for air." Madeline's hand found his on the bench, her fingers lightly covering his. "I'm glad." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Sophie play. Caleb was acutely aware of Madeline's hand on his, the gentle weight of it anchoring him to this moment. "Miss Maddie, Daddy, watch me," Sophie called from the top of the slide. They both waved, and as Sophie zoomed down with a squeal of delight, Caleb felt Madeline's fingers intertwine with his. He turned to find her watching him, a question in her eyes that he answered by gently squeezing her hand. The weeks that followed brought a gradual, natural shift in their lives. Sunshine Daycare reopened, but Madeline became a regular presence in their apartment. She joined them for dinner several nights a week. On weekends, they explored the city together, visiting museums, trying new restaurants, taking Sophie to plays and children's concerts. 1 month after that fateful morning when Caleb had knocked on her door, he invited Madeline to join them for a special dinner at his apartment. Sophie helped him set the table with their best dishes and insisted on making place cards decorated with hearts and flowers. "Is tonight when you're going to tell Miss Maddie you love her?" Sophie asked as they arranged napkins in fancy folds following a YouTube tutorial. Caleb nearly dropped the plate he was holding. "What makes you think that?" Sophie rolled her eyes with the infinite patience of a child explaining the obvious to a slow adult. "Because you do, and she loves you too. I can tell because she looks at you the way Mommy used to in the pictures." Caleb knelt beside his daughter, his heart full. "You'd be okay with that, if Miss Maddie and I cared about each other that way," Sophie nodded solemnly. "Mommy told me before she went to heaven that love is the most important thing. She said she wanted us to find it again someday." She touched Caleb's face with her small hand. "Miss Maddie makes you smile, Daddy. The real kind, not the pretend one." Caleb pulled his daughter into a tight hug, overwhelmed by her wisdom and the blessings she was giving him. "When did you get so smart?" "I was born this way," Sophie informed him seriously, patting his back. When Madeline arrived that evening, Sophie greeted her with unusual formality, showing her to the table with grave ceremony before announcing she had a very important homework assignment, and disappearing to her room, a transparent excuse that Caleb knew Madeline saw through immediately. "She's giving us space," Madeline observed, accepting the glass of wine Caleb offered. "Should I be nervous?" Caleb smiled, taking her hand and leading her to the couch. "Not nervous, but I do want to talk to you." They sat facing each other, their knees almost touching. Caleb took both her hands in his, gathering his courage. "Madeline, these past few weeks have been extraordinary. You came into our lives when I was desperate, but you've stayed and become something I never expected to find again." He paused, suddenly uncertain how to express what he was feeling. Madeline squeezed his hands encouragingly. "What's that?" "Hope," Caleb said simply. "Joy, a sense of possibility. For so long after Sarah died, I was just surviving, just making sure Sophie had what she needed and keeping the business going. I didn't think about the future in any other terms." He met her eyes. "Until you," Madeline's eyes glistened. "Caleb, I know it might seem fast," he continued, "and if you don't feel the same way, I understand, but I need you to know that I'm falling in love with you, Madeline Ellis. And not just because you're wonderful with Sophie or because you make perfect pancakes." He smiled. "Though those things don't hurt." A tear slipped down Madeline's cheek. "It doesn't seem fast to me," she whispered. "It feels like the most natural thing in the world." She leaned forward, touching his face gently. "I'm falling in love with you too, Caleb Reed, with both of you." Their first kiss was gentle, a question and answer in one tender moment. When they pulled apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers, his heart fuller than he'd thought possible. A small giggle from the hallway broke the moment. They turned to see Sophie peering around the corner, her eyes wide and delighted. "Does this mean Miss Maddie is going to be around forever now?" she asked hopefully. Madeline opened her arms and Sophie ran into them, climbing onto the couch between them. "I'd like to be," Madeline told her, looking at Caleb over the little girl's head, "if that's okay with you." "It's okay with me," Sophie declared. "Daddy needs someone to teach him how to cook." They all laughed, and as Caleb looked at the two of them together, his brilliant, brave daughter and this remarkable woman who had appeared in their lives when they needed her most, he felt a sense of rightness settle in his chest. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Caleb stood in the kitchen of Madeline's apartment, soon to be her former apartment, supervising as movers carried boxes to the elevator. Sophie darted between the workers, helping by checking off items on a list she'd created herself. "Is this the last of it?" Caleb asked as Madeline entered carrying a small plant. "Almost," she said, setting the plant on the counter. "Just a few more things from the bedroom." Caleb caught her around the waist as she tried to pass, pulling her against him. "I can't believe you're actually moving in with us tomorrow." Madeline smiled up at him, her arms looping around his neck. "Having second thoughts, Mr. CEO?" "Not a single one," he assured her, kissing her lightly. "Though Sophie has informed me that the current apartment is inadequate because it doesn't have a yard for the dog she's convinced we're getting." "Ah, so we're getting a dog now," Madeline laughed, apparently, and possibly a rabbit. Caleb shook his head, amused by his daughter's expanding vision of their family. "She's also been asking about a baby brother or sister, but I told her we needed to take things one step at a time." Madeline's expression softened. "One step at a time sounds perfect." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Speaking of steps," Caleb's eyes widened. "Madeline? I know traditionally you would be the one to do this," she said, opening the box to reveal a simple platinum band, "but I've never been much for tradition. And I want you to know that I'm all in, Caleb. I love you, I love Sophie, I love our life together." Tears pricked at Caleb's eyes as he looked at the ring, then back at the extraordinary woman holding it. "Are you proposing to me, Miss Ellis?" "I believe I am, Mr. Reed." Her voice was steady, but he could see the vulnerability in her eyes. "What do you say?" Instead of answering immediately, Caleb reached into his own pocket and pulled out a small box, opening it to reveal a diamond ring. "I say great minds think alike." Madeline gasped, then burst into laughter. "You were going to propose tonight after dinner. I had a whole speech prepared." Caleb couldn't stop smiling. "Sophie helped me pick out the ring last weekend. She's been bursting to tell you. So that's why she's been giving me those mysterious looks and giggling." Madeline's eyes shone with happy tears. "I was worried she'd found the ring I got you." They stood in the half-empty apartment, holding their respective ring boxes, grinning at each other like fools. "So," Caleb said finally, "is that a yes from you?" "Yes," Madeline whispered. 1,000 times yes." "Then my answer is also yes," Caleb said, taking the ring from her box and sliding it onto his finger. "Though I should warn you, marrying a CEO comes with certain responsibilities." "Such as?" "Emergency childcare for one," Caleb teased, placing the diamond ring on her finger. "And teaching said CEO not to burn breakfast foods." "I think I can handle those responsibilities," Madeline laughed, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. They were interrupted by Sophie bursting into the apartment. "Is it time yet, did you ask? Did she say yes?" She spotted the rings and squealed. "You're getting married. Can I be the flower girl? Can I pick my dress? Can we get the dog now?" Caleb scooped his daughter up, his heart so full he thought it might burst. "Yes, yes, yes, and we'll discuss the dog," he answered, making Madeline laugh. As he held his daughter in one arm and reached for his fiancée with the other, Caleb marveled at how a single desperate morning, a burst pipe, a canceled daycare, a knock on a neighbor's door had changed everything. Sometimes, he realized, the most beautiful beginnings come from what seem like disasters. And sometimes, the kindness of a neighbor becomes the love of a lifetime.